What's up, guys? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. Today we are talking the XFL final roster cuts. They were leaked early, and we're going to take a look at who are some of the biggest names that were dropped or placed on IR and give you guys a full analysis. Not going to waste any time. Let's get started right away. Alright, guys, so first I just want to come out and say I know this is not an official XFL source. This was not posted on their website because as of yesterday we were informed that we were not going to get the final roster cuts until Monday, January 27th. But they have leaked online. I will post a link to the article if you guys want to check it out yourself. But these, from what I've been able to gather from this website, they've always released official information, so we'll know 100% on Monday how accurate they were, but it looks like we've gotten a leaked list of all of the cut and IR, guys that were placed on IR for the final 52-man rosters across the XFL. So we're going to go down one by one and look at this from a lens of how this impacts fantasy. And we'll start with the Dallas Renegades, beginning with the guys that are on IR. So fortunately for them, they were, I believe, the only team that didn't have anyone that they needed to place on IR, so that makes the analysis there pretty easy. And then from a cut perspective, there were a few somewhat bigger names that were cut. I was a little surprised by Simi Cobbs, namely. He had shown up pretty well in preseason through the scrimmage games that they had played, so I'm kind of surprised that he got released. And then James Quick as well, another name there, receivers that I thought was a bit, it was standing out a bit more than some of his other peers, but apparently they didn't think so, so they let him go, as well as Floyd Allen. And then let's just go through and kind of break down what this means for their final roster. So up to this point, there were 10 receivers on Dallas, and then now they've cut down 4, which brings their final depth chart down to Jeff Badette, Jazz Ferguson, Freddie Martino, Flynn Nagel, Jared Hurd, and Joshua Crockett. So I think this really opens the door for Jeff Badette and Jazz Ferguson to explode even further with even less competition. But I really also think this definitely benefits Freddie Martino, who had already kind of been looking pretty good. They traded for him in the offseason, and I definitely think this is a huge plus for him to get some of those other names out of the way. So Freddie Martino should be your wide receiver 3 in Dallas. We'll see who ends up, if there's anyone else that ends up standing out here. Looking at the running backs, there was one running back cut. Wasn't anyone that we were really looking at. That brings their final depth chart down to 4. We got Cameron Artis-Payne, Lance Dunbar, Austin Walter, and Marquise Young. Again, I think the analysis stays about the same. We're pretty excited for Artis-Payne and Dunbar. Austin Walter pretty much stays as that handcuff. No cuts to either the quarterbacks or the tight ends, and again, no one sent to IR, so Dallas got lucky there. Let's jump over to the DC Defenders, first looking at the guys on IR. So we have here Frank Brown, Deion Harris, and Dion Holloman. So no real huge names here, at least on the offensive side. I'm sorry, guys, I don't do much analysis on defense. I play fantasy, and we mostly just focus on offense there. Not really any huge names on the cut list either. Joe Walker and Jordan Westerkamp kind of stand out a little bit, but they're much bigger names in Washington, D.C. For the Defenders other than those guys there. So what that brings us down to, with the 3 wide receivers that were cut and the 2 that were placed on IR, we now have 6 guys on the active roster. We have Rashad Ross, Eli Rogers, DeAndre Tompkins, Tyler Palka, Malachi Dupree, and Will Likely. So I think that, again, just gives us our solid wide receiver 1, 2, and 3 for fantasy. We got Rashad Ross as the number 1 there, Eli Rogers as the number 2, and then DeAndre Tompkins, who's been looking really great all preseason. I think this definitely opens the door for him. There was 1 running back cut, but not really anyone that we were looking at. Brings the roster down to 4. So we got Jarrell Presley, Donnell Pumphrey, Nick Brissett, and Khalid Abdullah. So that's pretty much what we were already anticipating. So Jarrell Presley and Donnell Pumphrey still the main guys there. There were 2 tight ends cut, which brings the active roster down to 3. I still like Kari Lee, but we'll see what ends up happening as the season comes along. Tight end is just going to be that really hard spot to figure out. All right, let's jump over to the Houston Renegades, again beginning with players placed on IR. Now, Jalen Saunders is a pretty big name here to go on IR. Jalen Saunders looked to be at least their wide receiver 3 and was looking to be a pretty good fit in this system. So that's a bit disappointing to see that he's going to start the season on IR. And if anyone knows below, can comment how IR works in the XFL. I couldn't find any official information on it, but I'd imagine that that's going to keep them out for the vast majority of the season, considering the IR in the NFL is typically 8 weeks, and there's only 10 weeks in this season, so I'm not sure how long they have to stay on IR for, but that's going to really put a damper on anyone in fantasy. You're probably not going to draft anyone on IR because they're going to miss most of the season. All right, and then let's see. Deontay Alexander was also cut. That's another big name at the receiver spot that I was a bit surprised to see. Marquez Williams, a running back, a bit surprised to see him get let go. And then Tavon Jacobs, another big name that just really surprising. I believe they traded for him and then they released him, so that's definitely not good for him. But a lot of shift in the receivers for Houston with the 2 receivers cut and the 2 placed on IR. Brings the depth chart at wide receiver down to 8, which is still pretty large, but now we have Sammy Coates, Khalil Lewis, and then a bunch of unproven guys in Sam Mobley, Raymond Bolden, Cam Phillips, Raheem Malone, Blake Jackson, and Hunter Sharp. So that pretty much just solidifies the dominance of Sammy Coates and Khalil Lewis at the top, and we'll have to see who ends up stepping up to get that wide receiver 3 and number 4 spot in this team that doesn't have any tight ends, is going to run a lot of 4 wide receiver sets. Could be a lot of wide receiver by committee outside of Coates and Lewis. So not great for fantasy, but going to be interesting to see how that works on the field. And then with Marquez Williams getting cut, we now have 4 running backs: Andre Williams, James Butler, Nick Hawley, and Steve McShane. I think that definitely helps Andre Williams' draft stock go up because Marquez Williams was looking to get some time there. Andre Williams now is pretty much the standout guy to me, the only one on the team that I would be interested in drafting. And then they also released their 3rd quarterback, Marcus McDade, so that means that only Philip Walker and Connor Cook are on the roster now, so down to 2 quarterbacks. All right, let's jump over to Los Angeles. We have on IR, they've placed Winston Dymel, the running back there. So they have a pretty decent set of running backs already, so I don't think this is going to hurt them too much, but definitely not good for that guy. Feel bad for anyone that gets placed on IR to start this new league. And then we jump over to the cuts. Kieris Garrett is a name that stands out to me. They also released 2 tight ends here, which I'll get into that in a second. But let's break down what the final roster looks like. So with the 2 receivers cut, they still have 9 receivers on their team, which is a lot. Brings us to Nelson Spruce, Trey McBride, Katie Cannon, Saeed Blacknell, Kermit Whitfield, Jordan Smallwood, Jalen Green, Adonis Jennings, and Daquan Hampton. So this is a pretty deep wide receiver roster here. No true standout alpha characters, but Nelson Spruce, Trey McBride, Katie Cannon have all looked good. Saeed Blacknell has been turning a lot of heads in camp. Kermit Whitfield as well. So they have 5 really solid guys, and we'll just end up seeing who ends up getting a lot of playing time. But this could end up being a spread the ball around system with Josh Johnson throwing the ball, so it might be hard to figure out who's going to be good and consistent for fantasy week in and week out. On the running back side, the one running back placed on IR brings the final depth chart down to 5, so still a lot of running backs there with Elijah Hood, Larry Rose, DeJuan Harris, Martez Carter, and Alex Terrell. I still think Elijah Hood will get the majority of the carries, but having 5 running backs definitely leads me to believe that they're going to run a running back by committee pretty strongly here with Larry Rose and DeJuan Harris, maybe even Martez Carter getting mixed in. So that could definitely put a damper on Elijah Hood's upside. And then, as I mentioned, the tight end cuts brings us down to just Brandon Barnes. So Brandon Barnes is now the only tight end in LA. We've already liked Brandon Barnes a lot as a receiver out of the backfield, or receiver, for as a tight end, and I believe that this will definitely increase his value even more because now they They literally only have Brandon Barnes, he's like their biggest target, so he's going to get a lot of red zone targets, not going to have any other tight ends stealing his red zone and extra point tries, so I think Brandon Barnes' draft stock just went up even more. All right, let's jump over to the New York Guardians. We have the guys placed on IR. This is honestly the one that hurts my heart the most. So Tanner Gentry and DeAngelo Yancey are placed on IR. I was so excited for DeAngelo Yancey for this team. I thought he was going to end up being their best receiver, and seeing him placed on IR it really sucks, but that's just the game of football. And then we jump over to some of the guys that were cut here. Darius Price, Bernard Reddy at wide receiver. Not really many big names here from the players that were cut. It's mostly just the problems with players getting placed on IR, so that's going to shake up their roster a lot. So with the 4 wide receivers that they cut and the 2 that they placed on IR, it brings their final roster down to Mikael McKay, Colby Pearson, Teo Redding, Joe Horn, Austin Duke, and Justice Liggins. Now, I had been debating back and forth for a while that DeAngelo Yancey was going to be better than Mikael McKay. Well, now Mikael McKay probably jumps up to that top tier of receivers. We saw Colby Pearson and Teo Redding both get a deep bomb touchdown in their scrimmage game, but other than that, Joe Horn, Austin Duke, Justice Liggins, I haven't heard very much about them at all. I'm going to have to do a bit more research, update the rankings for you guys, but Mikael McKay is definitely shooting up in the rankings. And then there's one tight end that was placed on IR. There's still 4 on the roster, so that doesn't really give us too much more confidence in EJ Bibbs, but I still think he's the best guy that they have there. And then they cut their 4th quarterback there, leaving with Matt McGloin, Luis Perez, and Marquise Williams as their 3 quarterbacks going on their final roster. All right, let's jump over to the St. Louis BattleHawks. Some big names that were cut here, but we'll start with the guys placed on IR. No names from an offensive standpoint. They put Jamel Garcia-Williams, Trevon Reed, and Marquez White, all defensive players, on IR. Jumping over to the cuts for the offense, oh my goodness, they've let go Terrance Williams and Connor Davis, 2 guys that we had ranked as the highest wide receiver and highest tight end on this team. Definitely going to cause some massive shakeups in the way that we were perceiving this team. I'm really surprised that Terrance Williams didn't make the team. I'm not sure why he ended up getting cut. Maybe he just didn't have the motivation and effort that he used to have in the NFL. But those 3 wide receiver cuts bring the final roster down to 7. So now we have DeMornay Pearson, Damian Washington, Alonzo Russell, Brandon Riley, Carlton Agudusi, Marcus Lucas, and Keith Mumphrey. So definitely shaking things up there. I think LaDainian Washington and DeMornay Pearson will be the main benefactors of Williams being gone, but we'll see who ends up taking that number 1 spot. And then the guys behind them, I think Alonzo Russell will probably end up being the 3, but Marcus Lucas is there as well. So this is definitely going to be a very interesting team to figure out week by week. And then the 1 running back cut, and then there's actually 1 running back placed on PUP. I forgot to mention Sherman Beatty was placed on PUP. Now that brings their final active roster down to 4 guys. We've got Christian Michael, Matt Jones, Leonard Tillery, and Keith Ford. I think this is pretty clear now that Christian Michael is going to be the closest thing that we have to a bell cow in the XFL, making him far and away worth your number 1 pick. And then with the 2 tight ends cut, that leaves us with only Cole Hunt, who already scored a touchdown in the scrimmage game this week. So I think Cole Hunt is going to see a massive boost to his fantasy value for tight ends. Look for that in our ranking update today after these cuts. All right, let's jump over to the Seattle Dragons. Now, the Seattle Dragons placed Ruben Mwala on IR. Also, they put defensive tackle DeAngelo Tupou on IR, and then they cut Fred Ross, which was, I'm sorry, I'm jumping. I've got it correct. Sorry, they cut Fred Ross, which was a bit surprising. A lot of people were pretty excited to see what Fred Ross would do in Seattle. So that's definitely going to shake some things up there. No other real big names from the offensive side that were cut, but that brings, with the 3 wide receivers cut and the 1 placed on IR, that's going to bring their final roster down to 7. So they have Kason Williams, Austin Prohl, Dontez Bird, Keenan Reynolds, Alonzo Moore, John Santiago, and Mika Holder. This definitely is the weakest wide receiver group in the XFL, and it's going to make things quite interesting to see. I like Keeson Williams to end up being the main recipient now with Fred Ross gone, but Austin Proehl, Dantes Bird, Keenan Reynolds, Alonzo Moore will probably all be involved. It's just going to be kind of a mess of an offensive team between the quarterback and the wide receiver situation. Probably going to lead to a lot more running, which, getting to that, with the one running back that was cut, they're down to 3 guys now. They've got Kenneth Farrow, Jaquan Gardner, and Trey Williams. That probably just means that with the interesting situation for the receivers, we're going to see a lot of Kenneth Farrow and Jaquan Gardner. They're definitely both going to be heavily owned fantasy assets, and I think they'll be really good for your team. All right, let's jump to the final team. We're looking at the Tampa Bay Vipers, and we're looking here. They placed Tareed Folston on IR. That's definitely going to impact their running game. And then no real big names here from guys that they were cut. Couple of receivers, but these were guys that were all kind of buried on the depth chart. A running back there as well, also a tight end. So not really too many surprises here for Tampa Bay. Bringing the 3 wide receivers that they cut brings the active roster down to 8. So they have Antonio Callaway, Stacy Coley, Shantavis Jones, Dante Dye, Jalen Tolliver, Reese Horn, Tanner McAvoy, and Daniel Williams. Definitely a strong core of wide receivers on this team. I still like Antonio Callaway and Shantavis Jones the best, but I think Stacy Coley, Dante Dye, and Jalen Tolliver are all good wide receiver 3s in their own right. So we'll see who ends up, taking the dominant role here. And then with the one running back that they cut and the one that they placed on IR, that brings the running backs down to 4, because I'm still counting Quentin Flowers as a running back, and that definitely, I think, boosts both the value of Quentin Flowers and De'Veon Smith with the movement to the running backs. But we've got Quentin Flowers, De'Veon Smith, Jacques Patrick, and Mac Brown. So going to be another one of those teams that I think the running backs are going to be heavily involved. With the cut to the tight ends, we're down to 3, but we already know that Nick Truesdale is going to be the main guy here, so that doesn't really impact as much, and no quarterback movement overall. But anyway, lots of shakeups today, guys. Definitely gives us a bit more clarity for some teams, and honestly a lot of ambiguity for some of these other teams where we saw some big names that we thought would be the biggest fantasy contributors. So lots of shakeups. Comment down below what surprised you guys the most, and also, with all these changes, I've already updated the rankings to reflect the players that have been cut or placed on IR, so feel free to check those out. You can click the link in the description below if you'd like to access those, or go to fantasyaddictionnetwork.com. As I said, we've been updating these all off season long, and now a huge update today with all of these roster cuts and guys placed on IR. But again, I hope you guys found this information really helpful. Again, let me know what surprised you. I'm personally really surprised by Terrance Williams getting cut, and most saddened by DeAngelo Yancey getting placed on IR. But a lot of shakeups today. Definitely going to be interesting to see how this all plays out as the season comes to a start here within the next couple weeks. So hope you guys are pumped, and thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.